what was the world like that we used to live in? See, were conditions so radically changed for previous humans that that field alone constitutes a new field of study? And then I started going through just from what little I knew of history. And I said, there's a lot of historical things, incidents, events, etc., that if the public knew, they would change their perception of various parts of what they think is American history. And I'll try out some of them with the audience, just as kind of a give and take. We're often made to believe that the West was totally unsettled until after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. There might have been trappers out there. There might have been mountain men, traders. They were putting through railroads, but they certainly hadn't gotten, other than the Union Pacific, they hadn't gotten very far as of Little Bighorn. But no one could imagine that there were all kinds of white ranchers out there. I mean, it was pretty bleak. So that battle's 1876. Western religion, basically materialistic. And I think that's due because of the Western tradition that God works in history, which is to say in events, but not in people and places. So what you end up with then is the capability of establishing a church or shrine any place that's convenient to people. Let's train the earth as an object, and Indians don't believe it's an object. And they base that on thousands of years of experience. And in a way, you get irritated with non-Indians. But another way, they were reconciled with the European land, and Christianity came in and destroyed all their shrines, did all kinds of detrimental things to them. And unfortunately, they were under Christianity so long that when they came over here, they did that to Indian shrines. And the idea being that there is nothing spiritual, everything is material. You find that just promulgated throughout science. So even in the social sciences, people don't stop and think that the best things we experience, the best things we know are immaterial things. They're ideas or emotions. But religion and science in the West are both wholly materialistic. And consequently, when you then try and tell them, well, if you look at the earth, there are certain places that seem to have power, and we don't know what kind of power it is, except you have a different feeling, you feel energized. And the question then for ceremonials is, how do you approach that? Take something that's larger in yourself and create a vehicle whereby you can be in communion with it. And I think the various tribes located these various places. It's difficult to tell some of the younger generation. These aren't perfect circles, say, and these aren't perfect triangles or whatever. That frequently you can have an area that has 2 or 3 mountains within, say, 50 miles of each other, which are sacred to different tribes. And they're sacred not because they designate them that, but because they've experienced that. And the ceremonies then come out of their experience, not out of a philosophical search to explain things. So if you talk to a good medicine man, they'll say, well, I have different spirits that help me do this and that, but I really, at the bottom, don't understand the whole thing. I just know it works. And so Indians had this, I think, tremendous respect for whatever powers existed in the universe. And they conceived those as personal powers. Power had personality. So I think that these locations were discovered to be sacred, and it probably took a long time, probably thousands of years, to sort out how you approach those. And that's why a lot of the ceremonies are Simply go out into the land at a certain place under supervision of a medicine man and open yourself up.
My friend, I am going to tell you the story of my life. And if it were only the story of my life, I think I would not tell it. For what is one man that he should make much of his winters, even when they bend him like a heavy snow? So many other men have lived and shall live that story, to be grass upon the hills. It is a story of all life that is walk-on, and is good to tell, and of us two-leggeds sharing in it, with the four-legged and the wings of the air, and all green things. For these are children of one mother, and their father is one spirit. It is the story of a mighty vision given to a man too weak to use it, of a walk-on tree that should have flourished in a people's heart with flowers and singing birds, and now is withered, and of a people's dream that died in bloody snow. But if the vision was true and mighty, as I know it is true and mighty yet, for such things are of the Spirit, and it is in the darkness of their eyes that men get lost. So I know that it is a good thing I am going to do, and because no good thing can be done by any one man alone, I will first make an offering and send a voice to the Spirit of the world, that it may help me to be true. Now I light the sacred chanupa, and after I have offered it to the powers that are one power, and set forth a voice to them, we shall smoke together, offering the mouthpiece first of all to the one above. So I send a voice. Hey, 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 hey. Grandfather, Great Spirit, you have been always, and before you no one has been. There is no other one to pray to but you. You yourself, everything that you see, everything has been made by you. Hear me, four quarters of the world, a relative I am. Give me the strength to walk the soft earth, a relative to all that is. Give me the eyes to see and the strength to understand, that I may be like you. With your power only can I face the winds. This is my prayer, hear me. The voice I have sent is weak, yet with earnestness I have sent it. Hear me. It is finished. Heshet Allah. Now, my friend, let us smoke together, so that there may be only good between us. I was born in the moon of the popping trees, on the little Powder River, in the winter when the four crows were killed. I am a Lakota of the Ogallala band. My father's name was Black Elk, and his father before him bore the name, and the father of his father, so that I am the fourth to bear it. He was a medicine man, and so were several of his brothers. Also, he and the great crazy horse's father were cousins, having the same grandfather.
The science of the day was virtually unorganized. It was the goodwill of the people and their common sense in reporting these things that made this possible. Now, what I've concentrated on thus far is possible physical changes of animals that might at one time have been on this continent and affected people's lives. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I am simply reporting the material I've been able to gather. If there was such a radical difference, and I think you can demonstrate that once all the petroglyphs of Pleistocene animals are gathered, and once all of these early quasi-dinosaurs are gathered. If that was so much different, was the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual life of those people different also? And here was something that I had been wanting to get into for a long time. And so I started looking for instances in which Indians had shown what I would call a talent or a power over and above what the average citizen of today has. In other words, could these medicine men do certain things? Did Indians get messages in non-cause and effect communication sequence? What was life like for those people long ago? And I think in some tribes, you still have people who live in this sense that they're in tune with a whole different set of communicators in the physical world. Now, almost everybody in the world's read Black Elk Speaks. If you don't get it in an Indian studies course, by the time you get out, you really haven't had Indian studies at all. And a lot of people concentrate on his first vision where he falls sick. The men from the sky come, and it's time to go meet the grandfathers, etc.
I was 4 years old then, and I think it must have been the next summer that I first heard the voices. It was a happy summer, and nothing was afraid, because word came from the Washishus that there would be peace and that they would not use the road anymore, and that all the soldiers would go away. The soldiers did go away, and their towns were torn down, and they made a treaty with Red Cloud that said our country would be ours as long as grass should grow and water flow. You can see that it is not the grass and the water that have forgotten. I was out playing alone when I first heard the voices. It was like somebody calling me, and I thought it was my mother, but there was nobody there. This happened more than once, and always made me afraid, so that I ran home. It was when I was 5 years old that my grandfather made me a bow and some arrows. The grass was young, and I was horseback. A thunderstorm was coming from where the sun goes down, and just as I was riding into the woods along a creek, there was a kingbird sitting on a limb. This was not a dream, it happened, and I was going to shoot at the kingbird with the bow my grandfather made, when the bird spoke and said, "The clouds all over are one-sided." Perhaps it meant that all the clouds were looking at me. And then it said, "Listen, a voice is calling you." Then I looked up at the clouds, and two men were coming, head first like arrows slanting down. And as they came, they sang a sacred song, and the thunder was like drumming. I will sing it for you. Behold, a sacred voice is calling you. All over the sky, a sacred voice is calling. But when they were very close to me, they wheeled about toward where the sun goes down, and suddenly they were geese. Then they were gone, and the rain came with a big wind and a roaring. I did not tell this vision to anyone. I like to think about it, but I was afraid to tell it. What happened after that until the summer I was 9 years old is not a story. There were winters and summers, and they were good, for the Washishus had made their iron road along the Platte and traveled there. This had cut the buffalo herd in two, but those that stayed in our country with us were more than could be counted, and we wandered without trouble in our land. Now and then the voices would come back when I was out alone, like someone calling me. But what they wanted me to do, I did not know. This did not happen very often, and when it did not happen, I forgot about it. For I was growing taller and was riding horses now, and could shoot prairie chickens and rabbits with my bow. The boys of my people began very young to learn the ways of men, and no one taught us. We just learned by doing what we saw, and we were warriors at a time when boys now are like girls. It was the summer when I was 9 years old that a voice came and said, "It is time. Now they are calling you." The next day, I was very sick. Both my legs and both my arms were swollen badly, and my face was all puffed up. I was lying in our teepee, and my mother and father were sitting beside me. I could see out through the opening, and there 2 men were coming from the clouds, head first like arrows slanting down, and I knew they were the same that I had seen before. They came down and said, "Hurry, come, your grandfathers are calling you." Then they turned and left the ground like arrows slanting upward from the bow. When I got up to follow, my legs did not hurt me anymore, and I was very light. I went outside the teepee, and a little cloud came and stooped and took me flying very fast. And when I looked down, I could see my mother and my father, and I felt sorry to be leaving them. Then there was nothing but the air and the swiftness of the little cloud that bore me and those 2 men still leading up to where white clouds were piled like mountains on a wide blue plain. And in them thunder beings lived and leaped and flashed. Now suddenly there was nothing but a world of cloud, and we 3 were there alone in the middle of a great white plain with snowy hills and mountains staring at us. And it was very still, but there were whispers. Then the 2 men spoke together and they said, "Behold him, the being with 4 legs." I looked and saw a bay horse standing there, and he began to speak. "Behold me," he said. "My life history you shall see." Then he wheeled about to where the sun goes down and said, "Behold them, their history you shall know." I looked, and there were 12 black horses, all abreast, with necklaces of buffalo hooves, and they were beautiful, but I was frightened, because their manes were lightning, and there was thunder in their nostrils. Then the bay horse wheeled to where the great white giant lives, and said, "Behold," and there were 12 white horses, all abreast. Their manes were flowing like a blizzard wind, and from their noses came a roaring, and all about them white geese soared and circled. Then the bay wheeled round to where the sun shines continually, and there 12 sorrel horses with necklaces of elk's teeth stood abreast with eyes that glimmered like the daybreak star and manes of morning light. Then the bay wheeled once again to the place where you are always facing, and there stood 12 buckskins all abreast, with horns upon their heads and manes that lived and grew like trees and grasses. And when I had seen all these, the bay horse said, "Your grandfathers are having a council. These shall take you, so have courage." "Make haste," the bay horse said, and we walked together side by side, while the blacks, the whites, the sorrels, and the buckskins followed, marching 4 by 4. Then, as we walked, there was a heaped-up cloud ahead that changed into a teepee, and a rainbow was the open door of it. And through the door I saw 6 old men sitting in a row. And they looked older than men can ever be, old like the hills, like the stars. And the oldest of the grandfathers spoke with a kind voice and said, "Come right in and do not fear. Your grandfathers all over the world are having a council, and they have called you here to teach you." His voice was very kind, but I shook all over with fear, for I knew that these were not old men, but the powers of the world. I knew this and was afraid until the first grandfather spoke again. Behold, where the sun goes down, the thunder beings you shall see, and have from them my power. And they shall take you to the high and lonely center of the earth, that you may see, even to the place where the sun continually shines. They shall take you there to understand. Now there was a wooden cup in his hand, and it was full of water, and in the water was the sky. Take this, he said. It is the power to make live, and it is yours. Now he had a bow in his hands. Take this, he said. It is the power to destroy, and it is yours. Then he pointed to himself and said, Look close at him who is your spirit now, for you are his body, and his name is eagle wing stretches. And saying this, he got up very tall and started running toward where the sun goes down. And suddenly he was a black horse that stopped and turned and looked at me. And the horse was very poor and sick. His ribs stood out. Then the second grandfather, he of the north, arose with a herb of power in his hand and said, Take this and hurry. I took and held it toward the black horse. He fattened and was happy and came prancing to his place and was the first grandfather sitting there. The second grandfather, he of the north, spoke again. Take courage, younger brother. On earth a nation you shall make live, for yours shall be the power of the white giant's wings, the cleansing wing. And now it was the third grandfather who spoke. He of where the sun shines continually. Take courage, younger brother, he said, for across the earth they shall take you. Then he pointed to where the daybreak star was shining, and beneath the star 2 men were flying. From them you shall have power, he said, from them who have awakened all the beings of the earth with roots and legs and wings. And as he said this, he held in his hand a sacred chanupa, which had a spotted eagle outstretched upon the stem. And this eagle seemed alive, for it was poised, fluttering, and its eyes were looking at me. With this chanupa, the grandfather said, You shall walk upon the earth, and whatever sickens there, you shall make well.
On page 151, though, for those of you who are going to follow up with smashing essays that are going to be published, Black Elk is out hunting one day, and he runs into a blizzard. And he doesn't know what to do, so he pulls his buffalo robe and wraps up in it. He's going to let the blizzard go by. And he thinks he's all alone out there, that this is it. And he says, the wind went down that night, and it was still and very cold. While I was lying there in a bison robe, a coyote began to howl not far off. And suddenly I knew it was saying something. It was not making words, but it said something plainer than words. And this was it. Two-legged one, on the big ridge west of you, there are bison. But first you shall see 2 more two-legged over there. So you've got a man huddled in a buffalo robe in the middle of a blizzard, and he hears a coyote out of Lord knows where. And the coyote is howling, and this message comes into his mind. Now what happens, he survives the night. He gets up and doesn't know whether to trust this message that he's heard being given. And so he starts to the west to check out see if there are really any buffalo around. And to paraphrase everything, as he's going along, he sees this lump on the ground, and I guess a little steam coming from it, and he goes over, It's an old man and a boy who are also wrapped up in a buffalo robe, and they're starving. They haven't been able to hunt any buffalo. Three of them go over the hill. There are 7 buffalo caught in the heavy drift right in between the hills. They kill some of the buffalo and eat, and everybody's all right. Now, that's a different world than we live in today. We have thousands of religious leaders. In fact, you can go down south and wave the Bible 3 times, you're qualified to interpret it. You go to a Protestant seminary, and if you can accept the fact that all the knots in the 10 Commandments are later interpolations, well, you get ordained there, too. And I don't even want to get into Catholic Church, what you got to do there. We got all these religious people, and yet how many of them could interpret the howl of an animal and get this communication and connect and move through things? Now, 1884, on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana, a famous medicine man named Ice or White Bull was asked to display his powers. And see, this is after the Cheyenne flight north, after they've been given a reservation. You've had missionaries and traders and Indian agents around this place for perhaps 8 or 9 years. And so this is what happens when the people ask White Bull to demonstrate his medicine man powers. He had some men dig a hole first, deep enough for him to sit in, and carry the dirt away. You can still see it piled up there. And this is from John Stanzin timber, and if you could see the thing piled up, you're talking about 1960, that pile of dirt is still there. You can see it piled up. They put a teepee over it and brought 2 rocks from the hills, so big and heavy that it took a number of men to carry them. Then Ice ordered the military society members to stand around the outside while he and some others performed ceremonies inside the teepee. After that, he got down in the hole and they put rocks over it and covered it completely. Go outside now, he ordered them, and I will sing and then give you a signal for you to come back and lift the rocks off. So they did this. The men came in and removed the rocks, and Ice was gone. They all searched for him, and some dug and kicked around the hole to see that he was not hiding. When they had given up, they put the rocks back on as he had told them to. And shortly they heard the signal and took them off again, and there was Ice. So you had a medicine man using his powers, put in an absolutely unescapable situation. He disappears. Now, what I didn't bring is the corresponding story of the women in the camp who are preparing food, and Ice is walking by their teepee, and they said, well, wait a minute, you're supposed to be in the hole down there. And he said something to the effect, well, I'll go back down there when I'm ready. He's walking around one part of the camp while everybody's watching the hole there. So that's a demonstration of those powers at a point where the Northern Cheyenne themselves are coming to grip with industrial society and certainly accepting the overtures of that society and trying to learn to live in it. A great story told by Stanley Vestal, which I really love, which I will read to you. It's very short. This is out of his book Warpath, and those of you who've only read Sitting Bull or White Bull by Vestal, get his whole literature and see. The guy has marvelous short essays on Indians and some on plains warfare. This is Vestal. Though the chief had promised to tell me the full story of his life, he was somewhat reluctant to relate this vision and requested that I hear it when there was no one else in the cabin. And there are 3 cabins in a row, and the old man's cabin is the center. He explained that whenever he told it this story, A fierce thunderstorm followed, and therefore he told it very seldom. The old man does not see well and is rather deaf. Now, I kind of dealt with that. I felt close to that thing. He told the story at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He had been sitting with his back to the north wall of the cabin. Inside, and the sky was cloudless. We finished the conference at 7 o'clock that evening and had supper. By that time, thunderclouds had piled up in the northwest, and my interpreter pointed out certain features of the clouds, which indicated a storm about to break. Immediately after supper, a terrific thunderstorm burst upon us. Now listen to this. The cloud was small and swept out of the north directly for my cabin, where the story had been told. No rain fell on the adjacent cabins with a few yards on either side. And the wind was so strong I had to move my car to keep it from rolling off the bluff. The chief made no comment on this appalling fulfillment of his prediction. He took the storm for granted. Now, what kind of world did these people live in? See, how did that old man know that? If you got 3 cabins in a row and you got a small cloud and it only hits a middle cabin, what the hell are you dealing with here? Hey, and when you say this is pre-reservation days, these people are free. You talk to a variety of academics about this, and they'll say, well, it's just coincidence. My response would be, well, why don't you go out and make one of these coincidences happen, and then we'll accept that. But the question is, how was their life different? Were they more holy? Were they more sincere? Or were they so tuned in to a natural environment that these things could happen to them?
Yep.
See, none of us, myself included, are in a situation where an unusual but natural thing can happen to us. And consequently, we're cut off from communication. But if you had a choice of the world we live in now and the world those people lived in then, when those kind of experiences were possible for people, which would you honestly choose?
Yeah.
And I myself would like to know more about the universe, more about the living things, more about where we came from, more about the history of the planet.
Exactly that.
And I think those old timers knew what that was.
Mm-hmm.
Our knowledge of the world, our knowledge of ourselves, and coming to be our knowledge of what the world used to be 20,000 or even 1,000 years ago